Test, test, test.
Welcome to Volume 3 of the IPL power list of this year. Our last before we look at the finals, I suppose, or do exit interviews, or whatever it is I sometimes do. It looks like we already have our 4 finals teams. Probably, maybe. And there seems to be a gap opening up behind them. But a few teams have gone on some good and not so good runs this year. So I suppose there's always a chance that anything could happen. And as usual, we've looked at recent form, schedule, but we've also factored in the finals a little bit and the fact that we finally have a good idea of what these teams have done because we now have a decent sample size. As always, I would like to apologize for not mentioning every single detail for each team's success or lack of success. I mean, of course, if I did do that, every video would be 7 hours long and no one would watch them. And more importantly, as always, I apologize ahead of time for hating your team and also loving the team that you hate. It just happens to be that somehow I know which team you like and I don't like them, and I know which team you don't like and I like them. I'm inside your head.
This is the last knot. My dad told me to say this.
Mumbai's recent form is 2-1. If there's a better way to troll your broken-hearted fans, can't think of one much better than smashing 2 of the best teams in the league, only to collapse to one of the few teams who you could have leapfrogged to get off the bottom. But hey, they won some matches. I think it's worth mentioning Tilak Varma and Sky because when your team is so rubbish, even your good cricket gets overlooked. And no matter what Mumbai have thrown out there, these 2 have made over 300 runs at decent rates so far this. And considering they have often had to dig their sides out of cesspools of utter despair, I think it's worth saying that they have had very good years. It's not always easy to maintain good runs when, no one else is. Murugan Ashwin is also worth talking about because it may not look like it, but he has replaced Chahar's number almost exactly, really. And considering he doesn't have that kind of record normally, that's a huge bonus for Mumbai. I talked about him on the leg spinners video, but it's worth noting that this is one of his best ever seasons. And despite Mumbai's bowling falling apart around him, he's been good. And it's worth remembering, he only went for 1.6 crore. Kieron Pollard and Rohit Sharma have combined to average a shade over 30 this year. You throw Brevis into that, and there's a lot of innings that just haven't really gone anywhere for Mumbai. Brevis was a punt. I didn't think they needed to make it. Maybe they thought differently. But they did have Tim David around, who they actually punted very early on. But Pollard and Rohit, I mean, you wouldn't expect them to both score this bad all year long. Pollard has had a couple of bad years in the IPL before, which is sort of being overlooked now as people are writing him off forever. And I'm certainly going to need to see 2 bad years in a row before, you completely get rid of Pollard. As for Rohit, this is his first year with a sub-20 average. He might still get it up at the end of the year, but to what? Their run home doesn't matter at all, of course, but they do have a chance of a couple of wins at the end of the year just to confuse everyone. Kolkata's recent form is 2-2. They beat Rajasthan and Mumbai, and they lost to Lucknow and Delhi. I suppose it allows for them to still be within some kind of sniff of the finals. At least they can see where the finals are being played. I think when they've been at their best this season, it's been with the ball. Umesh Yadav early on, and again of recent times. Tim Southee when he came in, and Andre Russell picking up a lot of wickets at the end. Umesh alone is probably one of the finds of the tournament. Virtually unwanted at times. And also them managing to squeeze some wickets out of Dre Ross's knees is an extra bonus. The bowling has not been the problem. It's worth putting a spotlight on Sunil Narine though. He currently has an economy of 5.22. It's not just less than a run a ball, it's so much less than a run a ball. Considering that Chakravarti is not in this team at the moment. And so they lost their ability to sort of pincer-like strike teams from either side. You would have thought that he would have helped Narine actually build pressure. Doesn't seem to have mattered at all. I wasn't really sure when Kolkata decided that Narine and Dre Russ were going to come back because of age and injuries, and perhaps in Narine's case his best form was behind him. That certainly looks like that's the case for the bat. But as I sit here at the moment, this is currently his best ever economy year. And he's had some pretty good economy years. In fact, if he manages to do it, this will be the 3rd time he's gone less than a run a ball in an IPL season, which is hilarious. But, I've talked about so many of their bowlers. They just don't make any runs. They have 3 players with decent enough totals, but almost nothing else. They lose a wicket every 20 runs, the worst in the league, and they're also not scoring that quick. Venki has struggled, Rahane didn't work. I thought Rana had been okay, but he probably just hasn't scored as many runs as they were hoping for him to do in the new role. I think the overseas is a much bigger problem. Billings, Finch and Narine just not giving them any runs, really. Their run home is Sunrisers and Lucknow. Look, they're currently at 5 and 7, which seems probably better than what they should be. And I suppose they're really not that much worse than a whole bunch of teams who have similar kind of records to them. Their last game is Luck now, who just smashed them by 70 odd runs. If they lose to Sunrisers, none of this matters. Probably none of this matters, no matter what they do. Chennai Super Kings had 2 good wins and a solid enough loss against RCB. They seem to have worked out how to make T20 work. It's scoring a lot of runs. More teams should try it, in my opinion. Over the last few games, they've been averaging more than 35 runs per wicket while scoring at nearly 10 runs and over. Silly of them not to try that before, if we're being honest. Part of this is not having Mitch Santner as your pinch blocker and also upgrading your overseas batting a lot. But Gaikwad also found some super sexy form. But I said on the last Powell list, one thing that Chennai had to do was just upgrade their overseas players by picking someone like Devon Conway. I didn't think he'd be this good, of course. 237 runs in his following 141 balls. That's pretty handy. His numbers have always popped when you look at advanced algorithms or, different parts of the game. And I think we knew even before this IPL what the quality of his overall talent is. So it is kind of remarkable to think that they played with 3 different overseas finger spinners this year, and they could have just picked Conway. I think overall, Moeen Ali not finding form and then not being able to squeeze any quality out of some of the old bodies that they'd like to collect is probably the major problem that they had. But also their inability to pivot from the formulas that had worked for them before. Not that it matters for anything more than pride, but it is quite a tough run home to the end of the season. If they keep making runs while their bowlers hang in there, I think they can at least bother the better teams. They seem to have fought off Mumbai for last spot. They do actually have a game against Mumbai coming on, so that's almost like a 4-point game. Or I suppose if you're playing for last spot, it's like a negative 4-point game. Sunrisers have gone none and 4. It does tell you how ridiculous this league is. They've basically gone on 3 different runs at this point. They look terrible. If you look at my power rankings, they were like down near the bottom, then they were up, and now they're down near the bottom again. And it's because they've been on 3 different runs. They struggled at the start of the season. Then they won a bunch of games and they looked great. And now they've lost a bunch of games and they look terrible again. I have no idea with this team. We'd need to work out if the Sunrisers are any good. You need at this stage about 120 games in a season. And remember when I said on the last Power list that it was unlikely that all the Sunrisers bowlers would lose form at once. That's in fact why I had them so high up. Well, fucking hell, they actually gave it a go. Marco Janssen has gone at 2 runs a ball since that last Power. Natarajan, Umran Malik and Kartik Tyagi are all around the 10 runs and over mark. Only Bhuvi has managed to keep his good form going. And weirdly enough, because of all this, their batting has actually started to make a lot more runs of recent times, starting to bat really quickly. They just haven't been able to make enough to overcome the bowling. Kane Williamson is currently having the season from hell. I'll do a video about it soon, but it's actually getting quite ridiculous the way he's scoring. Like his diamond duck was probably around a par knock for him the other day. This is the problem with an overseas player as a leader. That's why I did the video on it last year. If they lose form, you're not just getting one bad player, you're making it impossible to replace them without causing so many other changes. Williamson's form will improve. And I say that if only because it can quite clearly not get any worse. I keep thinking, like, who are the real Sunrisers? They lost 2, won 5, and now lost 4. It's a lovely pattern, but what on earth does it all mean? If right at the moment they had 3 bowlers who were bowling pretty well with their current batting, I actually think they'd probably still be winning games. And they should be a final. But I don't know how to have any faith in them right now, because I don't know which Sunrisers is going to turn up next. They play Kolkata, Mumbai and Punjab. They could and probably should win all 3. That's about as easy a run as you will find at the moment. And it will leave them 8 and 6. They've certainly made life hard for themselves. While they may have made life hard for themselves, the run at the end of the season has not. Punjab had a really hard run over the last few games, and although they only won a single match, I thought they looked better than at other times in this season. But by losing, they really have made it very tough for them to scrape into the finals. I think form plays a big part of what happens in any one of these seasons, just because they are so short. But looking at them over the entire season, I do find it hard to believe that there's a really top team in there. Maybe I'm wrong, but even when they were batting like lunatics, I just couldn't see how this team would consistently win enough T20 matches to ever be a finalist. It's not the individual talent, it's more the way the team has come together. But I want to talk about Rabada, because in terms of impact, this has probably been the best season I've noticed from Rabada. Other years he took a lot of wickets at the death, and while they are handy, the game is already on its way by then. This year he's been much better earlier on, and I really think that has actually helped Punjab win a couple of extra matches. What they've never managed to do though is win 2 games in a row, and they're still hovering around a 50% win ratio, but it's never felt like they're about to get on a roll and go for a run or any of those other kind of cliches that mean the same thing as the last 2 things I said. They will likely be playing 3 teams at the end of the season that are all trying to ensure a finals berth one way or another, although the Sunrisers might well be out of it by then. So it's going to be tough for them, as they'd have to go 3-0 to have a very good chance. And they'd also need to have some very big wins to help their net run rate. Delhi continue to beat teams that are not that good and struggle when they play teams that are. Seems like they're really trying to tell us roughly where they are, which is a 50% team at the moment. Over the last 4 games, the bowlers have been leaking an econ of over 9. Part of that is because Mitch Marsh and Shardul Thakur have been bowling a lot, probably a lot more than they should have been. But really, it isn't the poor 5th bowlers trying to keep up. Kuldeep has started travelling, and Nortje just can't find his form. I am a massive fan of Rodman Powell, but his development has taken a lot longer than it should have. It was quite clear 4 or 5 years ago that this was the kind of player that was in there. But finally, over the last couple of years, he went off and he worked out how to handle leg spin, which has always been a major problem for him. His game is not suddenly whole, but it's a lot more round than it was before. And after a rough start to this season, he's been incredible over the last few games. They lost 2 close games to Lucknow, so they'd be 6-5 instead of 5-6. But that's really it. All their other losses weren't really that close. So it's not luck, and it's not collapses against poor teams. They've just been roughly at this level. Nortje not working, Akshar and Kuldeep's good form never really quite overlapping, and their batting has been individually good for numbers. But with the eye test, it feels like a different player has had a good game at each time, and maybe not enough have had good games all together. If they beat Rajasthan and crush their last 2 games, there's still a possibility that things could fall their way. I mean, their net run rate is better than RCB at the moment. But if Rajasthan beat them, they're looking at just getting back to being a 50% team, which I think seems about fair. RCB are doing enough. They lost a chance to beat Gujarat, but they beat 2 teams that you would expect them to do well against. And at the moment, it's their final spot to lose. Everyone else is kind of lining up behind them, but a distance back. Outside of Mohammad Siraj, who at this point must be injured, because I find it hard to believe a bowler of his quality would be this consistently bad. All their bowlers are taking wickets right now, including Glenn Maxwell. And with Hasaranga and Harshal in this kind of form, when the others get involved, it's crazy. And I'm going to stick with Hasaranga because he currently has 21 wickets at 15 in this competition. And of recent times, he's also started to have an economy drop as well. Now, the fact that he's managed to keep taking wickets while that has happened is interesting. And it could be 2 things. It's either dropping because he's just taking so many victims that at this stage, no one can actually score at him. Or finally, teams have started to show him more respect and they're trying to stay in against him, which they're still not doing, but they're also not scoring. Their losses include 3 to the Sunrisers, Chennai. Against the better teams, they've been consistently in and around games. So that tells you that they're slightly better than their record might show. And also, if you're coming into the finals, that is probably what you want to hear, that in the good games, they're there and thereabouts, because they're going to have to win every game to make it to the final. Of course, that's if they make it. They have a Punjab game followed by Gujarat. They would want to win both, and they might just need to because of their net run rate. But a huge win over Punjab could also be pretty handy. Lucknow's recent form, 3-1, and if you look at it really basically, they just won 4 on the trot before being mashed up by Rashid Khan and Gujarat. And they have 8 wins and 4 losses from the season. There's a lot of positives there. They're clearly a good team. And yet, I haven't put them in my top 2, have I? And the reason isn't that loss. It's the fact that they now haven't beaten a single team in the top 4. And I'm not saying this is a bad side. They've beaten up the average and the poor teams regularly. I'm not sure you can win games regularly if you're not a good side. But at the same time, coming to the finals, how many games would you actually back them to win at this point? I mean, if you just look at their last run, they won 4 games out of their last 6, but they were bookended when they played the good teams. It just keeps happening over and over again. I think I'm going to have to see a lot more from them before I buy in. It's worth mentioning KL Rahul again, because 450 runs, carrying a batting lineup that may not be quite good enough to go out on the park with him. I think I mentioned this last time in the Powell list. He must just get sick of this year after year, making all these runs kind of on his own. This sportcast has been a step up over what he had in previous years, but who is the second best bat this year? No one is averaging over 30. Quinny and Huda have been good, but not great. Others have chipped in, but they're winning 66% of their games on the back of essentially one huge batting performance. They do seem to have a lot of bowling that's working. The two Khans at the moment are taking a lot of wickets. Krunal Pandya has been outstanding with the ball this year. Holder has taken a lot of wickets, although Chamira has taken a lot of wickets and inexpensive. Probably only Ravi Bishnoi has struggled, and to get career or IPL best form out of 4 bowlers at one time is probably not what you would have expected coming in looking at this lineup. And I almost feel like this is the main reason they've been so good. Their run home is Rajasthan and Kolkata. It's really interesting to see how they go against Rajasthan, having, with everything I just said of them not beating the top teams. If they win that game, it will allay my fears slightly, and I've probably had them a bit too low here. Of course, if Rajasthan beat them, I got my IPL power list pretty much perfect, and maybe I should put RCB ahead of them. Either way, the last game is KKR. If they beat Rajasthan, they should be able to cement the top 2 position. If they lose to Rajasthan, it gets a bit more awkward. Rajasthan losing 2 close games to Mumbai and Kolkata, who are both playing for next season, is a savage nipple twister. They were really all set up to have a great run at the top 2, and they made it a little bit trickier for themselves. But they did beat RCB, which still shows their overall class, I think. Chahal and Butler is worth talking about, because is there any surprise that as those two have become a bit more normal, we've seen a slight slip up from Rajasthan. I mean, both were so good earlier in the season, and it's not like they've been terrible of recent times, but it's normal good of recent times. I think we all know that this team has never been that well balanced, and is that what we've started to see over the last couple of games? I'm not sure that we saw R. Ashwin as being the guy to fix every batting problem for Rajasthan before this season. But hell, they're trying to make him do it. And bowling wise, it's continued to be really hard to hit without taking a lot of... And they're probably banking on the fact that they don't need his batting as much when they get to the finals. But this year, he's hilariously averaged 16 with the bat and 150 strike rate. He's become this like sub Sunil Narine package. And he's probably scoring far quicker than they actually thought he could. I think the same thing about Rajasthan as I did at the start of the year. It's a really good top order batting lineup and a quality bowling lineup that is a couple of collapses at the wrong time from going home early. But this is the balance that has also got them this great record. So, it's hard to bet against at this point. They have a 4-point game with Lucknow. They win that, and they should be pushing for the top 2. And I would say they're probably in the top 2 best teams had they not just lost to Mumbai and Kolkata. I still think they're kind of in the top 2 best teams. Just couldn't push them up this week when they were 1-2. After that, of course, they have Delhi, who are probably still in for a finals chance at that point, although maybe not, and Chennai. If they go 2-1 in those games, that might be enough to creep into the top 2, if one of those wins is against Lucknow. But net run rate is still against them. Gujarat's recent run is 3-5. Their last 4 games are 2 wins against top teams and 2 losses against poor sides. That doesn't make my job any easier, if we're being honest. That also accounts for 2 of their 3 losses in the entire season. One of them was even a close game that they finally lost. I didn't even know they could do that. They have qualified already, so you've got to respect that. And I think it's worth looking at how many of their batters are in form. Quite staggering, really. Miller, Pendle, and then also Sahar's been pretty good with the bat after the whole Wade experiment. You throw in some Rashid hitting, and you can see why they've won so many matches. And think about that. On paper coming in, with Pandya having to bat high, that's a bit weird. Miller still trying to prove himself kind of almost after all these years. Shubman needed that one big year, which he hasn't quite got, but he's certainly on the way to. Tawatia seemed like more hope than anything else. And look at where all of those guys have ended up. It's a hell of a story. But I think it's worth talking about Mohammad Shami. 16 wickets and an econ up under 8. This is now 2 years on the trot that Mohammad Shami has been really good. But with Joseph and Ferguson being not really good, in fact, Ferguson being less than his normal self and Joseph not being that great, it's meant that Shami's performance has been even more important. They have now had 7 close games by my count, and they have won 6 of them. So you need to believe one of 2 things. They are the best team in clutch moments of any cricket team ever, or there is a little bit of luck in their record. And I don't think that makes them bad, and they're still in all those games. But it does make it very interesting as we get to the pointy end of the season. Their run home is CSK and RCB, and 1 win probably gets them top spot at this point. Or at the very least, they look like they have the double shot already available to them. But one thing I do want to see from them is just some better form, only because they have lost a couple of games recently. They'll probably be a little bit worried that their worst form has come just before the final. So even just splitting these games 1-1 would make them feel a little bit more confident, especially as they're a new team. They don't have quite the history that some of the other sides do. But that's the end of the IPL Power List Volume 3. Thank you for agreeing with all my choices. As usual, it's incredible just how accurate I am with every single thing that I say. It's actually getting to be quite remarkable. If you like this, comment, like, subscribe, do all the sorts of things. Press the little belly-like thing. And don't forget, 99.94. You can subscribe to 99.94 by clicking the logo right here. That will take you to the page, and you can go through to our beta launch. See you next time. 99.94 is my new venture. It is Cricket's Conversation. We are looking for people to sign up to our beta launch at the moment. And if you want more information about what it is, just click on the 99.94 logo and head over to the site. At 99.94, we talk cricket.